So the Beyond the Veil update released for Albion, and it is no secret that it was a complete disaster. At the center of such disaster is the MISTS. So in this video, I'm going to give my opinions and thoughts and suggestions on what SPI can do to rework or update the MISTS to make them the sort of fun solo area and duo area that they're originally intended to be. So in this video, I'm going to go over 6 things that I think need to be addressed to make the MISTS a fun and rewarding place for solo and duo groups. First, simply rework some of the base mechanics of the MISTS. Now, I was going to do a whole section on this, but my top 3 suggestions were for the blobs on the map, the skulls appearing on kill, and the loot protection system, and SPI has already addressed all of these, either changed them or are going to change them very soon. So good job to SPI on this one. I'm glad they're taking some of the easy quick fixes and implementing them as fast as they can. Second, objectives in the MISTS need to be reworked. You need objectives that bring people together and encourage them to fight, and the MISTS currently does not have very much of that. The largest offender is the mob camp quests. They do not provide any reason or incentive to have people fight over them. The reward doesn't expire or disappear, or it can't get taken by another player, so there's no reason to just wait out another player that's trying to kill you and come back later. As the most common objective in the MISTS, these really do need to be reworked to give people a reason to fight over them. The rewards for these objectives needs to be worth risking your life over, or else no one will ever fight over them. Some things that they could do is they could put a boss that spawns there that gives people loot or a bunch of fame or something. A chest is a classic one, or make it something like King of the Hill. Really, I don't think it matters too much what they decide to put in there, but it needs something to make the objective rewarding and worth fighting over. And I just want to make sure I clarify here, the objectives on these needs to expire or get taken by people in some way, so you can't just sort of ignore it and come back later when there's not somebody to fight. Other objectives need to be reworked as well, like Gathering, for example, could use a little bit of a objective-based rework. For example, shift sort of the money in Gathering out of just the random nodes around the zone and instead into sort of the random nodes that pop up on the map and spawn with the 30 ticks of the resource. Make it a resource that people have to go to that they can see on the map that they have to fight over to get value from, instead of just being something that you randomly find as you walk around. Lastly, the new mobs that drop the new artifacts, these are the #1 thing that people are going to want to get the value from and fight over, so they need to show on the map. If they're not showing on the map, then it's just whoever finds them gets them, instead of them being this nice objective, really valuable objective that people really want to get, and so they fight over it. Ultimately, all of these suggestions really just come down to one thing though: the objectives need to both bring people together and encourage them to fight. All of these suggestions will do that. It doesn't matter if you do these suggestions or not, it just needs to follow that formula in some way. Bring people together and make them fight. And while I did sort of suggest that every objective turns into this on the map valuable thing that you fight over, you don't have to do the sort of showing on the map bring people together for every objective. You just need more of them for people to fight over. Right now there's barely any, but if SPI were to shift everything to these type of objectives, that would also be sort of problematic, as if the zone is dominated by one person, then they would sort of just get everything. You do want some value to be found inside the zones out of clearly marked objectives as well, to give people a sense of exploration and just allow people to get value out of the zones without having to fight over these rewarding objectives. Third on the list of things to change and fix is to liven up the gameplay cycle. The objectives that are working well, for example, the small chests and the turbulent mists, increase them, make them more common, or make them a bigger part of the mists. Usually it seems like as a mist opens, one small chest spawns and then one turbulent mist spawns, and then it closes sometime later. You could do things like speed up how fast the mists go through that cycle. So if it normally takes 10 minutes to go through this cycle of a mist, make it 5 minutes instead. Make it open, make a small chest spawn, make a turbulent mist spawn, and then make it close right away. That way the players that want to fight over objectives and get good PvP can just do those objectives and then don't have to sit in a zone for 5 minutes waiting for the next one to open, and players that don't want to do those can still do the other activities in the zone that might not be as risky. Similarly, letting people move from mist to mist earlier was something I was going to suggest, but again, SBI has been on top of it, so again, good job to them. They're basically making some wisps spawn within the mist before it closes, allowing players that maybe got all the value they want out of the zone already to move on to the next one without having to wait for it to close first. Lastly, another thing that could be really great for the Mists but would require a lot more work from SBI is to increase the variety of objectives. Because right now, you feel like you're just doing the same thing over and over again and it gets really old really fast. So instead of entering a zone and having like 90% chance to just have a bunch of mob camp quest areas, make some like dungeons or something, like static dungeons with branching paths that you have to search, or make something like a solo world boss be an objective on a map, or like even something like an obstacle course. There just really needs to be more variety within the Mist and the normal gameplay cycle, so it's not just the same thing over and over again, relying super heavily on PvP to make it feel fresh and interesting. Fourth on the list is make ratting less rewarding and less attractive. So you can never truly get rid of ratting in an open world setting. It's just not how the game works. Albion is a game that will always have ratting of some form. However, as I talked about in my last video, there are lots of design things that you can change to make ratting less rewarding, less attractive. Changing the objectives and mechanics, like I talked about, will help a lot, but there's a little bit more that still needs to be done. For example, the Mists need to be more dangerous. Right now, you can sit on, for example, a tier 7 armored horse and be literally impossible to dismount unless you go like AFK or get hit by a bunch of people all ganging up on you for some reason. Hell, even a tier 3 horse is hard for a solo player to dismount without a specific build that's meant for dismounting people. The absolute absurd tankiness and survivability of mounts just makes the Mist so unbelievably safe, allowing you to just hover around people and wait for your time to strike. Mount HP or tankiness needs a change. You need to be vulnerable on your mount. It seems SBI is aware of this because they're changing the mount health debuff cap from 1500 to 1200, which is nowhere near enough. I mean, this isn't really going to change anything. 1200 health mount is still not dismountable for a solo player unless they have a very specific ganking build, and if it's a mount that has like armor attached to it, like oxes or armored horses, 1200 health mount with armor and magic resist on top of it is actually just dismountable for a solo player, barring some extreme cases. Really, if they want to go a simple route of just changing the numbers on the debuff, it's got to be like 500 health. Anything above that and it's still going to be almost impossible to dismount people as a solo. Personally, I think the really old mount system that Albion sort of got created with would be the best for the Mists, where if your mount takes any damage from a player, you're instantly dismounted, but really anything. Just make it way easier to dismount people so you're not just free and safe sitting next to people. Another thing that needs to be changed that really encourages the ratty playstyle is the IP inequality. When you go into a Mist right now, there's a good chance you'll find someone in like flat 4 or 4.1 with no spec who's a super new player checking things out, and there's a super good chance you'll meet some really super experienced player with like max elite spec and like 8.2, 8.3 gear. Those people existing in the same zones and fighting over the same objectives just doesn't really work. It promotes anybody that's not really at that high tier to just sit back and rat because they don't really have any other options. Now again, there's a lot of ways that you could address IP inequality, but in my opinion, just doing something simple like adding an IP cap is probably not the way to go because that doesn't really seem to fit the whole open world ideal. Personally, the best way I think you could do this would be add sort of like a stalker slash slayer option similar to how corrupted dungeons work. Remove the yellow zone mists. They make absolutely no sense. I have no idea why they're in the game. I cannot think of a reason why they added non-lethal, non-PvP yellow zone mists and replace them with sort of like a lower tier, lower IP capped mists that are less rewarding, similar to sort of stalker corrupted dungeons, and then turn the current mists into the no IP cap, have like a minimum IP to enter, high reward areas for those more experienced players. Really, like the flat 4 rats and newer players need to be separated from the really high tier, really experienced high specialization players. There are also simple balance changes that could really help the ratty playstyle be less attractive and less rewarding, like the minor work boot nerf that has been so unbelievably overdue for such a long time now. I don't know why SBI is okay with minor work boots in their current form. 120% speed for 10 seconds is just dumb. I don't know how they haven't changed it yet, but I hope they do visit it because of the MISTS. And just other sort of balance changes or problematic abilities like Bloodletter's E. This is a great time to look at those. And if ratting is still a big problem after you make objective changes and mechanic changes, you could even start adapting current game mechanics to the MISTS. Like Focus Fire, for example, is a buff that you get when you get hit by a lot of people, you become super tanky. You could make in the MISTS Focus Fire start at 2 players hitting you, so that if you get third party, you get a nice defensive buff against that second party. Really, overall, every sort of change that I've suggested will affect the ratting and make it less attractive and rewarding. It definitely needs to be monitored as they go on though and make changes, because as we've seen with the first couple days of the MISTS, if the meta favors rats, it is not fun for anybody. Number 5 on the list of things to changes are gathering changes. Right now, I don't think gathering really needs to be panic changed. I see a lot of people complaining about it and saying it's either really good or really bad. Right now, I think the best thing for SBI to do would just be to monitor it, because it's going to change a lot depending on the population of the MISTS. Obviously, in the first 2 days, everybody's in the MISTS and the zones are getting bled dry, so there's basically nothing to gather. However, it does seem like if we look a month or 2 in the future and the MISTS aren't as populated, that there probably would be a decent amount to gather. However, that doesn't really change the problem of the inequality between zones when it comes to gathering. Right now, they're either bled dry or just like sort of bad tier 6 resources, or you just find one that has like 3 8.3 nodes. Everything's tier 8, there's tier 8 everywhere, and there's just so incredible amount of money in one zone. It's definitely something to be looked at and to be watched. I think making changes now might be jumping the gun a little bit, so I'd prefer SBI to sort of see how it goes as the population stables out for the MISTS, but gathering and like the frequency of gathering nodes and how much value can be attained from them definitely needs to be on SBI's radar as they go forward. It could definitely become very problematic very fast. Lastly, I wanted to add in Brecilien standing as a suggestion as well, even though SBI is already planning to do something with it. A dev stated on the forums, this is something that is already being worked on and will be added. Unfortunately, we were not able to put it into the update in time without risking the release date getting pushed back by a lot. So right now, obviously the MISTS do not have a lot of value in them. There's not really a reason to go into them. They don't really give you much. Brecilien standing could increase that by a lot if they have some sort of currency attached to them, or if you get like a buff from having Brecilien standing, increasing the amount of fame you get in the MISTS and stuff like that, then that could increase the value of the MISTS a lot and help out a ton. So I think that's a really important thing to look for, is what's going to happen with Brecilien standing. I hope they implement it well and have that add some more value into the MISTS, because it is extremely important. Okay, so those were like the sort of 6 categories of things that I think SBI needs to 100% look at very quickly moving forward from the MISTS to make this update not a complete train wreck and reinstate my will to play the game. Just a very quick, too long didn't watch recap of all of them. First, rework the simple mechanics like blobs, death skulls, and loot protection, which they're already doing or have done. Second, rework objectives to being objectives that both bring people together and encourage them to fight over rewards. Third, liven up the gameplay cycle by doing things like speeding up how fast you go from MIST to MIST and how fast the things like small chests and turbulent MIST spawns, and potentially increasing some more objectives into the MISTs. Fourth, making ratting less rewarding and attractive by doing things like making it more dangerous by nerfing mounts and making them less tanky, decreasing the IP inequality so that there's not so much really high IP and really low IP players in the same zones, and doing things like balance changes. Fifth, gathering changes, not doing anything right away but making sure they're monitoring it, as it's definitely an area where things could go wrong. And finally, sixth, doing something with the Brecilien standing, giving some more value to the MISTs using that new standing, maybe as a currency or as a sort of buff. Let me know what you guys think. Do you agree with my suggestions? Do you not agree with them? Did I miss something that you think is really important? Let me know in the comments or have a chat with me in my Discord.